Hi guys, Olive here today to discuss my top 10 nonfiction books of 2024. I read a ton of nonfiction books every single year, and it's always such a treat for me right at the end of the year to look back at my nonfiction reading year as a whole and to pick the ones that really stayed with me the most, my top 10 of the entire year, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. I have ranked these books, and I'm going to be talking about them in reverse order, so I will start with my 10th favorite, and then work my way up to talking about my favorite nonfiction book of the entire year. And as always, these are simply the nonfiction books that I read in 2024. They weren't necessarily published this year. So let's start at spot number 10, which belongs to The Evolution of Beauty by Richard O. Prum, one of the 24 nonfiction books I wanted to make a point of reading this year. This is a science book that discusses a lesser-known Darwinian theory, which zooms in on the role that aesthetic preference plays in evolution as creatures, like birds or even humans, choose their partners based on what they find most physically attractive. Even if those traits don't do anything to demonstrate the creature's physical fitness, it's just what that creature likes. It's a theory that society was not fully prepared for back in Darwin's day. It definitely got plenty of pushback, and it certainly was pushed into the shadow of Darwin's theory of natural selection. That's the one that is still best known today. But Richard O. Prum gives it its due in this book, explaining it in very accessible and, frankly, very sassy language, how it works and where we can see evidence of it, which includes looking in the mirror at our own bodies. Science writing can sometimes be boring, I will admit that, but it's definitely not here. Just be prepared for a topic that's on the saucier side. At number 9 is another one that I read toward the start of the year. It's called The City Game by Matthew Goodman. And this book is about a 1950s era college basketball team in New York City and how some of its players began participating in a points shaving scheme in order to get some money in their pockets. But when they were outed as being participants, it led to a pretty dramatic fall from grace. I know fiction always gets the credit for making you feel like you've time traveled to a different era surrounded by all new people, but I would like to make the argument that nonfiction can do it just as well, and in some cases even better. And this book is Exhibit A. This author so skillfully creates this world for you as he's telling the story itself. So first, you'll get to learn about City College in New York City, and you will feel like you are a student on campus taking classes, before you then meet the basketball team, all the players and the coaching staff. Then you'll get a chance to meet those shady individuals behind the point shaving scheme, what its point was, how it worked, how the players got involved, before you then go on to meet the investigators who were trying to track them down. So yes, this is a book about sports, but it's also a work of true crime, and it's a work of history about this one very specific slice of New York City at this one point in time, and this whole world just expands gradually in front of your eyes as you move through this really compelling story. I am a basketball fan, so I probably had a little bit more of an in with this book than someone who doesn't care about sports at all. But this is so well done. You will be able to get sucked into this story, even if all those hoop stats go straight over your head. The book at number 8 is another highly specific one called The Devil's Element by Dan Egan, in which science meets environmentalism, as this author does a deep dive into the chemical element phosphorus. He talks about what it is, how we as humans first discovered it, what we went on to use it for, why it can be highly dangerous, but also why it's so essential in the growth cycle of plants, hence why we use, or really, I should say, overuse, fertilizers that are rich in it. From that point forward, this book does become a discussion about how our overuse of those fertilizers is throwing off the balance of many different natural cycles within our environment, and it's making different bodies of water uninhabitable at best and actually poisonous at worst during these crazy toxic algal blooms that happen during periods of the year. And because these things are such big issues in our modern day, this author does spend time discussing what we could do to address it. But not too much time, actually. I remember being astonished when I was reading this how much is covered in such a short book. Like, this author wastes no time in communicating his points in a very engaging way. You wouldn't think that you would be so drawn in by something that I think for many of us normally sits lonely and forgotten on the periodic table of the elements, but I certainly was, and I'm not the only one. This one has glowing reviews for a reason. Moving on to the next book on my list, I have to say I continue to be so impressed by the writer Michael Pollan. I really enjoyed his book, The Botany of Desire, last year, but this year I am so pleased to report that he is making his very first appearance on my favorite nonfiction books of the year list with The Omnivore's Dilemma. That titular issue that Michael Pollan figuratively chews on throughout this book is all about the challenging decisions that we face every single day as omnivores with all the choices out there of things for us to eat. What do we choose to eat? And Michael Pollan takes on this question by looking very closely at the American food system. He discusses how it operates, but then he takes a step outside of it in order to see it more clearly and point out its very clear flaws, but also when he considers more small-scale alternatives. I have to say, as someone who reads a lot of nonfiction books every single year, there are the types of nonfiction books that I'm really enjoying as I'm reading them. I'm learning a lot, but that I'm probably not going to think a whole lot about once I'm done with the book. I close it, I rate it on Goodreads, I store it somewhere deep in my brain. Unless something happens to bring that book to mind, I'm not thinking about it a whole lot. But then there are books like this one. These are books that follow me into my everyday life, the ones that linger, because I think about this book all the time. I'm thinking about this book on a weekly basis as I'm meal planning for our household or buying our groceries. And I think part of the reason why his books stay with me in that way is that he's so engaging in his writing and he's so respectful in his approach. You can tell that his aim is to get you thinking. It's not necessarily to force any one idea on you. He wants you to think about these things as you're making the best decisions for you, your life, your family, your household. And if that was his aim, he was definitely successful with me because I think about the things I learned in this book all the time, and I don't think I'm ever going to stop thinking about them. The number 6 spot on this favorites list belongs to a work of history called American Sirens by Kevin Hazard. And this one also falls a little bit more on the personal side because it's a story of the city of Pittsburgh, the place that I call home. This is the riveting story of how the first team of trained paramedics was assembled by the Austrian physician who invented CPR. And this book is all about the challenges that that team faced as a mainly all-black squad in Pittsburgh during the 1970s. I don't know how, as a Pittsburgher, I had never heard this story before, but what a joy it was to read about, especially in a book as good as this one. The writing is so cinematic. You really get to know all the people involved in the story. You're on the edge of your seat all the time. Like, I swear, if this one doesn't get turned into a movie or a miniseries, I will be shocked. Because of its title or its cover, or maybe even a combination of both, you may be fooled into thinking that the 5th book on my list is just some throwaway work of self-help, but you would be wrong about Hidden Potential by Adam Grant. This is a book that shatters this core notion that so many of us seem to buy into, that talent and aptitude is something you're born with rather than something you can build for yourself. The science and the case studies within this book suggest otherwise. Through intentional practice and goal setting, really anyone out there can achieve new heights. It really is just about sticking with something, which I know is so much easier said than done. Failing isn't fun. Feeling like you suck at something over and over again isn't exactly confidence building. It doesn't really feel great, but it is unfortunately a part of the process. But this book can turn that necessary but awful element in any story of growth into something that feels rewarding as you're doing it. This is one that I definitely want to revisit. I'm thinking about it a lot as I'm considering my goals for next year. I have a feeling this one is going to be life-changing for me again and again and again throughout my life. The fourth book on my list is another one that nestled into my brain and refused to leave. In a good way, not like a horror movie kind of way. It's called The Third Gilmore Girl by Kelly Bishop. And this is a memoir. It is the life story of the actress who actually began as a dancer. Then she originated a role in the musical A Chorus Line. She used the success of that to catapult herself into the acting career that she always wanted. And she eventually became the matriarch who we all loved or even loved to hate on Gilmore Girls. I've been a Gilmore Girls fan since I was quite young, so I was always at the very least going to like this. But it was the vulnerability that she showed within this memoir and all the wisdom she had within this memoir that really blew me away. Like, I loved reading about her story, of course, but it was the perspective that she had over her story that really touched me the most. I loved how willing she was to completely acknowledge and own all of her mistakes, all of her weaknesses as a person. But then at the same time, she wanted to give herself credit for her work ethic and her confidence and the people that she's brought into her life. She has really great friendships to this day. But I think most of all, the biggest feeling that I got from this book was one of legacy, which is something that I've been thinking so much about lately. So this book came around at just the right time for me. I mean, Kelly Bishop is an older woman. She has a lot less life in front of her than she has behind her at this point in her life. And there is such a sense of a life well lived within this book. She has given and received love. She has worked hard doing something she feels good about. She has survived loss. Like, I hope that if I am ever lucky enough to reach her age someday, that I feel that kind of pride in myself and my impact. I was just so inspired by everything that she's done, everything that she is. Again, I was always going to enjoy this because of who wrote it, but it's really the way that she crafted this memoir that turned it into a favorite of the year for me. You can probably tell we're getting to the cream of the crop here because I'm getting more effusive with my praise as we move further into the video. But in at number 3 is a book that surprised me so much. When I picked it up, I had no idea it would even appear on this list, let alone at number 3 on this list. And honestly, I think I enjoyed it all the more for how much it took me off guard. It's called Infused by Henrietta Lovell. It is a book all about tea, written by a woman who owns a tea shop and who travels all around the world sourcing different teas. This author makes a point to say at the beginning of this book that it's not intended to be the, like underlined, the story of tea, but her story of tea. And I think it bears repeating because that is exactly what this book is. It is her story of tea, her way of experiencing tea and how that has evolved as she has been a tea purveyor, as she has traveled to different places, learned more about its properties, how to get the most out of tea from the people who know it best, the people who grow it. And what I first said about this book in my first review of it here on my channel also deserves a second mention because it remains just as true. I have never seen or heard anyone else talk about tea the way that this author does in this book. The only thing that even comes close is hearing a sommelier discuss wine. And this book has this luxurious, dreamy quality to it. Like, you feel like you could take a bath in this book. And then at the same time, you're learning so much about tea. Like, if you love tea, you're gonna love this book. I am still standing in awe of this book and everything it achieved. And I finished it months ago. There is one more memoir on my list. It is my second favorite nonfiction book of 2024, Scenes from My Life by the late actor Michael K. Williams. He is probably best known for his role on The Wire, which is my all-time favorite show. But before the fame, he was just a young man growing up in New York City who pretty early on in his life developed a problem with addiction. But his love for dancing, performing, and then later acting, and then even later than that, the activism that his notoriety allowed him to do gave him so much purpose in life. Again, my appreciation for him and his work definitely left me predisposed to fond feelings about this memoir, But it was really his willingness to lay it all out there that really knocked my socks off. He shared so much in this book, especially about his addiction, which I feel like is something so associated with negativity and shame that people often don't talk about it. And if they're going to, they use distanced language, like they're trying to remove themselves and us from the ugly realities of it. But especially at this point in Michael K. Williams's life, when he was writing this memoir, he was so willing to talk about what that struggle is actually like. Toward the end of his life, he had actually found a new passion in getting out there and talking to and helping out kids who were going through very challenging early lives filled with poverty and violence. He talks about some of the conversations that he has with those kids in this memoir. And you can feel that because he brought the same honesty and lack of bravado or ego, the same way he brings it to this memoir, those kids really felt like they could connect with him and trust him. And he was really making a difference to those kids. And it makes it all the more challenging as you're reading this memoir, knowing that he relapsed and died from the drugs that he took before this book could even hit shelves. I am still so upset that we lost him, even more so after reading this book, but I definitely respect him all the more after reading it. I appreciate him all the more, and it definitely solidified my own belief that it is up to each and every one of us to get out there and do our own slice of good in the world in the best way we can. But now let's talk about my favorite nonfiction book of 2024. And I realize it may come as a surprise to some people, but since I read this book at the very start of 2024, it has become so interwoven into a now essential part of my life. So there really was never another option for my favorite nonfiction book of the year. It's The Joy of Movement by Kelly McGonigal. This book does talk, of course, about how good exercise is for the body. I mean, the health benefits of exercise are so never-ending that if there were one pill out there that provided all the benefits of exercise, everyone would want to take it every single day because it is that good for us. But you and I already knew that, right? I mean, we're told from a very young age that exercise is really good for us and we should be doing more of it. But given how much exercise can physically hurt, listing out its benefits isn't and has never been the best way to motivate people. What's special about this book, though, is how much it captures, almost bottles, the feeling of falling deeply in love with movement. What it's like finding an exercise that you love and then getting that natural high after a really good, intense workout. Why it's so freaking satisfying moving in the same rhythm as other people in the same room, like in a workout class. How finding the right music has this absolutely mind-blowing ability to make certain exertions feel less strenuous as you're doing them. These are all phenomena that I had personally experienced since getting started with my journey, or whatever you want to call it, back in 2022, but I had never heard anybody else talk about them. So sitting down with a book that put science behind these things, put into words things that I had only experienced completely by myself, took what was a very personal, very satisfying, but ultimately kind of solitary and a little bit lonely experience and made me feel like I was a part of something. I was once the teenager who hated gym class. I was once the kind of person who would never even think of running unless something rather large was chasing me. But then I decided to give myself the chance to participate in the movement that my body was built for, and that I, who am lucky enough to be completely able-bodied, am capable of. And I slowly started to fall in love. Slowly but surely, it stopped feeling punitive. It stopped hurting in a bad way. I started to notice my progress. Then I started to really like the feeling of those endorphins. Then I started to appreciate the ritual of it. Then I started to crave the challenge of it. Then I started to relish in the power that I felt. And now I crave all of those feelings on a regular basis. It is now an indispensable part of my life, something that I would never give up even if you paid me. So sure, you can look at my videos back from 2022 and you can see me now, and you will see someone who has lost 120 pounds and put on a lot of muscle. But I hope you see more than that. I hope you see someone who is doing and feeling better than I ever have in my entire life, because that's where I'm at right now. And then this book came along and it gave me the words and the science to understand what had happened to me. So will this be everyone's favorite nonfiction book? Likely not. But because of where I'm at in my life right now, it was definitely deserving of my top spot. It is my list after all. And I can tell you, I wish I had read this a whole lot sooner. So those were my top nonfiction books of 2024. It is a very personal list this year. I feel like a lot of these books drew me in because they had lessons that I needed to learn at this point in my life. I am so grateful to all of the authors on this list for some great reads and for some life-changing experiences, and I cannot wait to see what amazing nonfiction 2025 has in store for me. I would love to hear what your favorite nonfiction books of the year were, or if you have thoughts on any of my favorites, please feel free to leave any or all of that down in the comment section below. All the books that I did discuss today will be listed and linked for you in the description box below for your clicking convenience. And at the very bottom of the exact same description box, you will also see links to everywhere you can find me around the internet. So my Instagram, Goodreads, the Story Graph, all the places I'm the most active, in case you want to keep up with what I'm reading and doing right now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.